Well, I seem to have acquired another large collection of HO scale trains. So I think it's time to do another mass repair video here. And we've got quite a few interesting pieces to look at this time. So like the last video of this style, instead of looking into detail at each one, I'm just going to be going over the major points that needed repair and give each one maybe a few minutes of time at the most. So to start off, I think I'll do these smaller switchers. So this one here is an old Mantua center cab, and it's kind of dirty. It's got a couple bent railings. One is missing, but beyond that, it actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. So let's open this thing up and see what we can figure out here. Chassis drops out. Yeah, that just lifts out. So I'll unscrew that for now. And one thing about these old MU2 trucks is that you can't open them up. At least you can't properly open them up to clean things up inside. So hopefully there's nothing wrong with it, because otherwise I'd have to drill out these rivets, which I don't really want to do. Okay, actually it looks like it's working pretty well. Might have lost a little bit of magnetism, but it's still a pretty strong runner overall. So all this needs is a little cleaning and oil, and this will be ready for the track. Got the wheels cleaned up, so I'm just gonna give this some oil in a few choice locations. Let's see. Also, interesting note about how they made these wheels. The insulated ones are plastic and just have a metal tire pressed on. At first I thought these were painted white, but nope, these are just plastic wheels. Very interesting design choice, but it works. Got the shell cleaned up. I found a piece of wire that matched the original pretty closely, so I made a new handrail and replaced the front coupler there. So now I just need to get the chassis back into there. And when doing that, something I noticed along the way is that there are these little insulators that fits to the end tabs of these metal side frames. So just put one on each side, or one on each end. And then press that down into the slots. And actually the headlight mount broke off inside, so I'm gonna glue that real quick and then get the rest of it in there. Well, that turned out looking good. Let's take this over to the track and see how it does. A little noisy to start, but I've found that's how most of these Mantua motors are. The oil doesn't really stay in the bearings that long. They do last a long time though. Very reliable. And that's a smooth runner overall. This one turned out pretty nice. A little bit of trouble going over switches, of course. Just four-wheel electrical pickup and the short wheelbase. Other than that, this has turned out to be a nice little engine. Now next up is this Tyco MDT switcher. And this is one of the earlier ones with the original MU2 style motor, plastic frame. But this should be quite a bit better than the Power Torque units that came later. Shell is snapped on. Two latches on each side. And there it goes. It's missing one coupler. I'll have to figure out a way to replace that because the pin is also broken off. Couple weights in there. With the headlight taped down. This should be similar to the other little Mantua switcher I just fixed, but this one actually has a couple screws holding the motor in, so that'll make it a little bit easier to work on, I think. looks like these weights are snapped in, so maybe that'll make it easier to work on. And since I've got those screws out, just lifts off of there. Looks like those contacts are maybe snapped in. I don't think there's going to be any need to remove them though. This looks like a little piece of handrail or something. I don't know, it just fell out of there. Well, if it needs to go somewhere, I'll put it back in after figuring out where it's supposed to go. But I think that just got sucked in by the magnet, along with that twisted piece of metal. And all these steel wall shavings. So apparently whoever owned this before cleaned their tracks with steel wool, and that got left all around and sucked inside of the magnets. Well, it does still work. Yeah, this motor's going to be just fine. There's just a few more shavings in there that I'll pull out as it runs. I think I can get some of them with a brush too, just help to move them out to the edges. So I'll just add some oil into each of those bearings. I'm sure they've never been oiled before. All right, gave that a good cleaning and oiling, and that should all be running just right now. I also got a new rear coupler on there. I just drilled into the post in the bottom of the shell and glued in a piece of wire. The only thing I haven't done is replace the missing front railing, but I think I'll just go ahead and leave that off. Whoever buys this can add that on later if wanted. But for now, let's see how this runs on the track. So it's a little more voltage than the Mantua switcher. But beyond that, it's running nice and smooth. Not the quietest switcher around, but that's definitely a good runner. Next up, we've got this Mantua 040T, which is not in very good condition at all, really. I don't think this paint is even worth trying to save, so I'm just going to go ahead and disassemble this and strip all the old paint off. And once I do that, I can get to actually straightening things out and tuning them up, because this also feels kind of stiff, sluggish, and you can see that the crosshead slider there is out of position, kind of bent up, so I'll need to fix that before I even try to run this thing. So I should be able to take this apart just by getting this one screw out, which is already somewhat loosened, it would seem. There we go. And move it forward, not back. Let's see. We've got a bunch of little pieces stuck to the motor. Yikes. In fact, we've got a whole bunch of pieces stuck to the motor. These look like track spikes, maybe. And I'm glad I didn't try to start this one up, because that would have just really messed with things. There, get the wheels out. Brass bearings. All right, so that's the full disassembly of one of these. Only takes a couple minutes to do. We'll get these parts soaking in some thinner to get that paint off, and then while that's softening, I'll get this motor cleaned up and see if it'll work again. All right, well, those parts were all in such bad shape that I just disassembled it and gave it the full cleaning, so now I'll get that back together and we'll see if this motor works like new. I thought maybe the magnet was weak, so I put in an extra cube neodymium one that I had, but it does start up, but it's drawing almost 2 amps right there, so I think this motor has a bad armature. I do just happen to have another armature from another motor, so I'm going to clean that one up real quick and try swapping it out. All right, the replacement armature works a lot better. But I was right about the magnet. It has no strength left. I've even tried recharging it and it's just not holding any magnetism, so I'm going to just swap that out for that neodymium cube again. Bearings need a little oil, but a lot more torque now. So that'll be much better. Well, that old paint was no match for lacquer thinner. I dissolved it right off of there, and that looks really pretty good, I'd say. The body's in better shape than I thought it was. It was just the paint that was all worn out and chipped off. As it turns out, the chassis parts were blackened instead of painted, but I think those will look better with actual paint anyway, so once I get this tuned up and running right, I'm going to give the chassis a little coat of paint too. So as it turns out, that part had been fixed and glued on there before, just not very well, so I'll take care of that later, and then once this is painted over, it shouldn't even be noticeable. Well, painting's done. I made it Pennsylvania since these were some of the only era-appropriate decals I had for this type of steam engine. So just slip the body back on, get that screw in there, and that's done. Let's see how it does on the track. It's a bit noisy because of the old bearings, but it's running well overall. So that's another one down. Now next up, let's have a look at this PCC trolley from Pennsylvania scale models. And these would later go on to be the same ones offered by Bowser. I'll take that off for now. Sprung pantograph, that's nice. So I can only turn the truck one way, and I think I see a loose brush in there, so that would explain that if that's the case. Looks like it's just a couple screws holding the body on, so it should be pretty easy to work on this one. Yep, and that just slips right off. This is definitely the same type of motor that was used by Bowser later on, so yeah, they did get their tooling from Pennsylvania scale models, at least for this one. Old cloth wrapped wire. So this is definitely an older model. So that brush needs to reattach somehow. Looks like it goes on this way. And then the brush spring somehow holds that on. I think this goes around here. Looks right anyway, based on the other brush. I do feel some magnetism in there, so this motor might still be in running condition. Okay, it is wanting to turn. Well, that's definitely promising. I think this will just need a simple tune-up then. As for the front truck, I'm guessing I need to unscrew it from the motor before it can come off. Okay, so that's how that's all held together. Helically cut brass gears, nice quality. I don't want to mess up the magnetism on there, and since that's already working fine, I don't think I'm going to disassemble this any further. I'll just clean things up as they are, and I think that'll be enough. A little bit of fresh oil and grease, and that's already running smooth as can be. So I guess I'll just clean up the wheel treads and get this back together. And off it goes. Four-wheel electrical pickup, so it can lose power on switches here and there. Overall, that is running very nicely. And now right here, we've got an old MDC Roundhouse 060T. So this is from before they switched to a plastic body. So this is an all-metal model with the more typical motor setup inside with the direct worm drive. Unlike the later model that I have in my own collection, which you may have seen in one of my other videos, had the plastic body like I mentioned, and the motor was completely horizontal, and it had some compound reduction gearing to give it really slow operation. So this is quite a bit different, really, just because of that metal body and different setup. It's really a whole different model altogether. Anyway, let's get started with this. Should just be the one screw holding the body on. Aside from the chipped paint, it really looks like it's not in bad condition overall. Looks like the wire's in place. Everything is soldered the way it's supposed to be. And the motor does turn, so let's see if this actually does still run. Motor's wanting to turn. Might have a dead winding though. Okay, so mechanically it's actually still working perfectly fine. Whole thing needs to be repainted anyway, so I might as well just take it all apart, since I already know that it runs well. Well, found the problem. One of the windings was broken from the commutator, so I'll just reconnect that, and this motor should run perfectly fine. Yep, runs good as new. Well, now that I've got the body strips down, I can see that the person who built this never actually did any cleanup work around here, so we'll just file off some of these seams that are around in certain places. And that pump detail is missing, so I just happen to have this one from an Arbor Models kit, so I'll add that on and get this repainted. Alright, I've got that all painted and finished. I made this one Santa Fe, since around the area that this would have been around, they did have some 060 tank engines. So, get it going. It's a bit of a noisy one. With the open frame motor and all metal gearing, it's not going to be a quiet engine. It's running just fine. A little bit of a waddle. And works just fine in reverse too, so I'd say this one is good to go. Also, a little interesting thing I noticed while I was working on this was there was a spot to install an additional wiper to the front wheel, so I went ahead and put that together, so this has all 6 wheels picking up. So that'll make it a reliable runner. Now we've got an old Mantua 440 General, and this appears to be one of the older productions because there are no traction tires. These are just bare wheels. Looks like it's in pretty good shape overall. There are just a few paint chips around. I suspect this drive tubing is no good anymore, so let's get to tuning this up and getting it running. Got to disconnect both ends of the drawbar to separate the engine and tender. And there's still a little bit of flexibility in that tubing, surprisingly, so maybe it's still usable. Looks a little dirty though, so I'll clean that up. Motor's still turning, but it definitely needs oil. And this has that same early motor as that 040T. Yeah, that just comes off of there. Well, before I test the motor, I'll go ahead and put a little bit of oil in. Just notice this one even has the oil pad between the magnet and the rear bearing plate. So I'll wet that down too. And no problems at all with that motor. That's a nice smooth runner. All right, now the engine. Okay, so there's the inside of it. The drawbar just goes in there. This gear is completely dry. And something's binding too. Now, even though the tubing does still have some flexibility, I think I will replace it, just because it is a little too stiff to really work smoothly. Alright, it's all cleaned up and oiled and has a new piece of high flexibility tubing. Let's see how it does. Yeah, it's running nice and smooth. I had a little jump on that first takeoff, but everything seems to be just fine now. And now we've got a Gilbert F3, which is really just a special production Varney F3. It's just got Gilbert stamped on the plates, and they cut out the front pilot. So there's some paint chipping and wear around, so it doesn't quite look the best. But I think beyond that, this is in pretty good condition, so let's get this cleaned up and see what all it needs. See, normally the Varney shell has a screw down here. I'm not finding that though. Oh, you know what? This is just snapped on. There it goes. Yeah, it still has the screw post and everything for both the chassis and the shell. They just changed it to a snap-on instead. It's turning kind of stiff, so it definitely needs a good cleaning. Yeah, this is the late all-plastic gearing version. Plastic drive shaft and everything. Yeah, the old grease and oil in there is definitely sticky with age, so I think getting all that cleaned out of there will really help with making this into a good running model. Seems like something's shorted out. I don't know if it's the motor or if it's something else in the chassis. It's still drawing 2.5 amps. I'll just replace this one. I found another motor that fit with only a slight modification, and everything seems to be working well. So I'll just get the rest of the cleaning and oiling done. We'll see how it does on the track. Starts out nice and smooth. And it's working just fine. So I can go over switches, of course. The electrical pickup seems to be doing pretty well. That new motor works just fine too. Current draws over 0.5 amp at the higher speeds, but that's to be expected with these old drives and the open frame motors. So there's another one done. And now on the bench we've got a brass 282 from, I believe, the 1950s. I've been trying to find information on it, but I can't seem to identify the manufacturer. There are no markings around anywhere that I can find. But it seems to be a pretty nicely detailed and heavy model for its day. And someone started to paint it and never quite finished, and the paint job has become scratched and kind of beaten up since then. So I'm just going to strip this down, tune it up, and I think leave it in its natural brass instead. So starting with taking the engine apart, let's see what we've got here holding it together. We've got this whole front truck assembly with its spring and everything, only held in place by one small screw, but I guess that's enough. And then the screw for the boiler is right on the front here. Yeah, a couple more around back. Looks like one of them was lost and replaced at some point, because these are two different size screw heads. And now lifts right off. It's one of the nice things about these old brass models is they're usually pretty easy to work on. Motor is very loose in there. That looks like a Pitman DC60 or one of the clones of it. And it's trying to move. Okay, so it does work. It just needs a really, really good tune-up. Interesting. It looks like the front worm bearing is soldered to the valve gear hanger. I am really amazed at how complex this is compared to most of the older brass pieces I've worked on. I mean, look at this. These are individual brass bearings that are soldered into the slots in the frame instead of just dropping the axles in there. So it gives it a little more surface area and should hopefully make it last a little bit longer too. So this is definitely designed to be a running model. And as I suspected, the gearbox is soldered to the valve gear hanger. Very unusual. All right, after a good paint stripping and then 2 times in vinegar to get rid of as much tarnish as possible and scrubbing it clean, this is looking pretty good, I'd say. The brass is probably as clean as it's ever going to get. And after a good oiling and just some fine tuning, putting some extra washers in there to reduce the amount of slop in the wheels, this is running very nicely. All right, so that is back together. The only part that's missing from this is the original bell, but that can be replaced pretty easily with another brass part. I repaired a couple details, made a small modification down here because I found the valve gear was hitting that pipe. So that's got clearance now. Fixed a couple other small details here and there. Added a KD scale size coupler. And I think that this is ready to go now. Motor commutator makes a light squealing noise. That clears out when it's been running for a little bit. Well, it's running smoothly. Drawing just less than half an amp. Pretty good for a brass steam engine of this age. Of course, it's not going to be very quiet. At least not without a replacement motor and probably new gears too. But these are working just fine. Could probably use some additional time to run in, but I think this is going to be a strong and reliable runner for whoever gets it. And now looking at what's probably the worst of the bunch is this Tyco 040. It's missing the screw for the body, so it's not exactly staying on, but the tender is also damaged around the step areas. So I'll clean this up. I think I can get it running, but it could use a replacement tender, definitely. At least a replacement tender shell. A lot of oxidation on the frame and on the trucks, but I think that can also be taken care of. So this is one of the later ones with a plastic body instead of the metal body like you would get with the kits. So it looks like it has a headlight in it. One wire broken. The other end might be connected to this weight here, which would get its power through the chassis. As for the steam engine itself, see, it looks like it's missing one of these crosshead guides. Getting no response. Oh, there's a tiny hint of life for just a moment there. Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right, so it looks like that motor is working. It just needs a cleaning and some oil. So yeah, I should be able to turn this into a running model. Well, it cleans that up quite a bit. Got it back together and working. I couldn't find the other one of these crosshead guides, so it probably was just missing when I bought the model. So I 3D printed a replacement. It's a little flimsy, but it works. So it is at least a smooth runner. So aside from getting the tender back together, I think that's about as far as I'm going to go with this one. So I think it'll make at least a good project or parts model for someone. Okay, I've got that all put back together. Might as well give it a quick test. Needed some voltage to get started. It's definitely not reliable for electrical pickup, but it is at least working. What we have next appears to be an uncompleted project where someone wanted the Bachmann F9 shell but wanted a better chassis, so they started putting it onto this Athearn one. Of course, that was not finished, seeing as how the shell does not fit onto the chassis and things are kind of not exactly in one piece, so let's see if maybe we can finish this project. So let's start by disassembling things. These pads are hard. Might have to find a way to replace them. Yeah, the motor still works perfectly. And the rest of the chassis looks like it's in really good shape too. So this one I think just needs a bit of cleaning and oiling. New motor pads, of course. And beyond that, it's just making it so that this Bachmann shell can fit to the Athearn chassis. Alright, so in the interest of time and being a little bit of a cheapskate, I've made these 3D printed replacement motor pads. So I designed them to have a split here, so once I stick them in, I can insert a screw into each of these and it should expand the sides out just a little bit and make a sort of pressure fit anchoring into the chassis. Just have to get that in place. Okay, so that didn't anchor it in like I hoped it would. What is working is adding washers to each one. I should have just done that from the start. There, much better. That's not going anywhere. Alright, so this is all about back together, and I rearranged the position of the headlight because I found that the strip coming up here was actually blocking the front of the shell from fitting because it was hitting the big lens piece in there. So now it's attached to the super weight and aiming forward like that. Attached a coupler to the back, and then this foam block just gives it some support. I've also got those couple tabs in the frame now to hold the shell on. It's not a perfect fit, but it does well enough. And I made some new horns to fit on there, so the detail is complete. And thanks to 3D printing, they are fully hollow all the way to the back of the horn, which is pretty much impossible with your usual manufacturing methods, so it makes it look kind of cool. Looks good. Go ahead The light's shining nicely into the lenses and number boards, so you don't see quite as much of it in the cab. Alright, so I think this one's all good now. And now we have one of the newer Bachmann DCC F7s. And it looks like this one was having maybe some weathering work done on it. I'm not sure. Also had the front bit of pilot cut out. And it looks like some gold paint's been put on the number boards as well as kind of around the vents. So yeah, I'm not sure if that was an attempt at weathering or something else, but anyway, we can at least see if we can get this working. I haven't tested it out, so I'm not actually sure if it runs or not. No screws in there. It's kind of stuck. It's very possible that whoever was working on this lost the screws and used some tape instead to hold the shell on. Yeah, all right, it's starting to come out. Yeah, okay. Yeah, after losing the screws, I guess, the person just used some double-sided tape on one side to hold the shell on. Oh, and there we go. The screw posts have been broken out. So yeah, this one has not been treated well at all. At least the shell. At least the inside seems to look okay from what I'm seeing, aside from these random bits of tape or glue. That's not even tape, is it? That's just glue. Well, that works at least. I'm guessing the other one is also out of place, but at least I know that the motor works. So if I can get the universals back in place, this should at least be a good chassis. Yeah, so it looks like the universal is in place on this end. It's just not fully engaging. So this has fallen off, and that would explain that issue. I'll just put in a touch of super glue. Now I'll press that back on. And that'll be fine. Alright, so as I suspected, those loose universals were the only problem with the chassis. So after getting those reattached, everything seems to be fine. I also peeled out all the glue, which I think was actually clear silicone bath sealant, which was just kind of spread sloppily all around. So the shell is just sitting on there now, but I don't think that really matters too much because this shell is probably not worth saving anyway. Well, I'll leave that up to whoever gets this, but it does at least have a good chassis. And it's nice and smooth. It's quiet, just the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, you could put a nice quality shell from Bowser, Stewart, Intermountain, or even one of the Athearn Highliner shells, and this would be a really nice model. And now right here we've got an AHMC liner which has been custom painted. And based on the fact that the front pilot has been closed up, but there's also a front coupler here, I think that this shell had a different chassis at some point and things just got swapped around and mixed up. As for the chassis, this appears to be one of the very early ones from when AHM started selling these. So this is probably from the early 60s. Lead weight in back. You can see this has the 5-pole motor with the self-centering bearings, and looks like it's got decent windings on it, as well as some balancing that was done on the armature. You can see where the holes were drilled. So this will hopefully be a pretty nice runner when it's done. Okay. Alright, so yeah, this isn't quite the oldest version because the original chassis had a brass worm, and he would use a long screw, which was there's actually a hole right here in the chassis you can see. A long screw was kept there so that in case you ever needed to adjust the worm, you would screw it in there. You could loosen it, use it just to pull off the worm if it was too tight. But since this one has the plastic one, that screw isn't needed. There, that's working. Just pry up the entire truck, pulls the worm with it. Now I can just twist that off the rest of the way. Okay. Truck comes off. And there's your motor. Yeah, that's turning nice and freely. Yeah, that's running really well. Doesn't help that I have the clips on there, though. That's better. Now, the one fault with these is that they do have high current draw. This is actually using over 1/2 amp. It's running free. A lot of torque. But yeah, high current draw. So these are probably some of the least efficient motors in HO scale models. Well, bad news for this one. Both of these double gears that engage with the worm are split. And I have no way to replace these at the moment. So yeah, I might just have to, I might just keep this unit on hand for parts instead of selling it at the show. Well, things didn't work out for the C-liner, but I think I'll be able to get this one working no matter how bad it may be. Got an Athearn switcher. I believe this one's an S12. Just have to snap the shell off. And the only issue I see with this shell is that one of the rear steps is broken off. Beyond that, it all looks good. Just needs a cleaning. Of course, it's missing its handrails, but those are easy enough to replace. This is one of the early Gold motors. These little notches here, they only had those for maybe a year or two. Still had the steel flywheels from the previous motors at the time. So there's some rust through here. Overall, I don't think it looks too bad. Let's pop off these universals and squeeze these tabs to get the truck out. Before I can do that, I have to get the worm cover off. The gears are dry, but I guess that just means there's less cleaning for me to do. So, in a way, that is convenient. There, now it pulls off. Yeah, so it just needs a cleaning for the old sintered iron wheels, some fresh oil for the gears, and I think these trucks will be good to go. The motor still turns nice and freely, so I'm guessing no problems there. And yeah, that motor works just fine. Yeah, sometimes if both flywheels are just a bit off, you can counterbalance them without even having to drill them for additional balance. Yeah, back this way. I think that's about as good as this is going to get. Let's put a marking on these for alignment in case someone ever has to pull this apart again later. It'll be easy to twist those flywheels to line up with each other and work at their best. These metal frame trucks, or outside frame trucks, they're built basically the same as the later ones. But instead of dropping the axles out, you do have to actually take them apart because the bearings are in the side frames. Beyond that, it is exactly like working on the later ones. There we go, that's all cleaned up and tuned up now. And while I was working on this, I remembered that I actually have another shell in really good condition, just Pennsylvania instead of Southern Pacific, so I transferred the detail parts over to it. And I'll still have the Southern Pacific shell available too, for whoever might want it. But this way, it's a better condition, more complete model, even if the handrails are still missing. Yeah, that looks good. So let's test it out on the track. Yep, sounds like new. A bit noisy because of the, I'd say that's mostly because of the flywheels, and then also just the universals are a little bit sloppy in this one. It's running nice and smooth. I'm really not seeing any wobble at all, so this one has some especially good wheels on it. Headlight works too, it's just really dim because of its location. But this one's all done now. And now we've got this Athearn GP9, which I don't know if this is factory painted for reading or if that's custom painted, but it's definitely custom weathered. And it is a good looking paint job, so some nice quality work was done there by the original owner of this model. It is missing the front handrail, unfortunately, but it looks like the rest of the detail just about is present. There's one horn broken too. I'm sure fixing this one up will be pretty much like that F9, including the broken motor pads. So I guess I'll have to print some out for this one too. But yeah, it all looks pretty good mechanically inside. I'm sure it'll just need a quick cleaning and tune-up to start running again. Alright, I have things tuned up and together the way they need to be, and I just need to fix that little detail there. But I found that they actually, whoever customized this actually put in the smaller motor from Athearn switchers, so I had to modify my new printed pad slightly to hold that. It's still got enough torque to drive this model, it's just a little faster, not quite as powerful as the full-size Athearn Gold motor. And as is often found with these Athearn chassis, all four of the original axle gears had split and were no longer working, so I've replaced all of them with new ones, so that should work much better now. And I stuck a KD number 5 onto the back. So let's just get the shell on and get this over to the track. I did also straighten up the handrails just a little bit, although they're never going to be perfect, I don't think, just because of some mismatched stanchion height compared to the cab from what I can see. And the front handrail is missing, but I'm not going to worry about that in this case. Whoever buys this one can replace the handrails if wanted. Anyway, let's get this running. And that was a short circuit. Okay, looks like it was just the headlight contact strip, so I bent that around a little bit. Now it's working. And it's running nice and smooth too. And like I mentioned, that smaller Athearn motor does get it going faster than the larger ones do. These GP7s really don't weigh that much compared to some of their other models, so it's enough to drive this and pull a decent load of cars. Now for the largest model in the collection today, we've got a Rivarossi cab forward. This is one of the classic units with the ball bearing motor in it, so you can see the open frame on one side and look at just the right angle. And you can see the small nut that's at the end for adjusting the ball bearings. Cosmetically, this is in pretty nice shape. The only real problem is that there are a couple detail parts missing from the end of the boiler here, into the smoke box. And there's just a touch of rust on some of the tender steel parts. Beyond that, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. Now as for running, again, this was sold to me as a non-running model, so in this case I'm going to go ahead and wire it up real quick. We'll see if it powers up at all. Hopefully it does. And yeah, it actually starts up just fine. Actually, I think all it needs is a little cleaning and some minor adjustment. So I can hear some hesitation as the drivers go around. You can see it there too, with it at low speed. So I'll try and find that, work it out, and get this running a bit smoother. Now to get these apart, Riverossi's pretty clever with their screw placements. They're always hiding them in these little spots all over the place. Sometimes it's yeah, I think here's one right here. They'll hide them under various details. Sometimes you can pull off a dome here and there. Let's see if that's enough to lift the shell off. If not, oh, maybe, aha. One more under here. I think I can, yeah, pop those out. Oh, it's just a single piece. That makes it a little easier. There are two more screws right over here. There it goes. So there's your classic Riverossi chassis. So the two gearboxes here, which are the first stage of reduction, and then there's a second reduction stage within the lower chassis frames, which is about a 2.5 or 3-to-1. So that combines with the, I think it's about a 5-6-to-1 in these gearboxes here to give it a pretty decent gear ratio in the end. I'm not feeling the hesitation in this engine, so it must be the front one that needs the extra work done. So while checking through all that, I found the wheels on the geared axle were not pressed on fully, so they were quite a bit wider engaged than the others, so that could have been part of the hesitation issue. But anyway, that's fixed now. You can see the gear system that they have inside of there with the helical gearing instead of the typical worm arrangement. So these are fine-toothed and all metal, so it's definitely important to keep them well lubricated to make sure that these don't wear out with time. So there ended up being more wrong with this than I expected. So I found that this back axle, where these back drivers weren't exactly in quarter with the rest, and over a long period of running that this had already had, it wore the holes in the side rods into kind of an odd grooved shape, which was binding with the screws. So I actually expanded the holes, added some new brass sleeves to both sides here, did a little recordering of the drivers, and it seems to be working a lot better now. It's still not perfect, but I can turn this around without getting any really hard binds like I was getting before. All right, the last thing was getting these gearboxes cleaned out, and there was still most of the old original brown grease in there, and it was really sticky, so I got that cleaned up. So just adding some new stuff in there now, and I think the model will be ready to run after this. All right, let's see how it does. Takes some voltage to get it started. Actually, I think I need to add some oil to the tinder. But the engine is running just fine. Headlight still works too. Still kind of hesitates a little going in reverse. Once it gets going, looks like it keeps on going. That will definitely take care of that squeaking in the tinder. Yeah, that's much better. Now this one I've been curious about because you don't find Proto 1000s advertised as non-running very often. It looks like it's in nice shape overall, at least through the front of the box. Just a little warped railing there, which I think can be straightened out easy enough. So let's push that on out of there. And it's nice and clean. Honestly, it looks like it's almost unused. This does have the Athearn clone trucks though, and that feels pretty stiff, so I wouldn't be surprised if it just needs some fresh grease and possibly new gears if any of the originals are split. Yeah, with those coupler boxes off, just have to pop up the ends. There we go. Interesting. So this one uses the purple-ended open frame motor instead of the larger can motors that you find in other Proto 1000 models, even though that actually could have fit in that space here, I think. They just decided to go a different direction with it. Yeah, jammed up right away, so is turning, it just feels really stiff. Yeah, you see that's about 9-10 volts there, and the motor is turning the mechanism, but it's really having a tough time. There's definitely at least one split gear, so I will have to replace that. So yes, there were split axle gears, and it is all 4 of them, so I'm replacing all of them with new Athearn gears. So far I've got one truck done and it's working very smoothly, so now I just need to finish this one up. Speaking of getting this finished up, the old grease in here, I mean there isn't much of it, but what is there has pretty much turned to thickened sludge, so that explains why the motor could barely turn. Alright, let's see how it runs. Takes off nice and smooth. There's full speed. The constant lighting circuit takes quite a few volts off the motor, so it kind of prevents it from being a fast runner, but for one like this, I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah, that turned out real nice. Now for one of the most infamous HO scale models that I know of. It's the PlayArt 260. It has been sold by Model Power, as you can see, as well as Lifelike, possibly a couple others. The issue with these is they have a near 100% failure rate. Even though they sold these for probably 30 years, I don't think any improvement was ever made to them. And this one has the same problem. The axle gear splits, and that leaves the model as non-running. Beyond that, it looks like it's almost unused. Only a little bit of dirt on the drive wheels there. I have another one of these. I've experimented with it quite a bit, trying to find different gears that'll work. Right now I have it powered, I think, with an Athearn gear. But yeah, you can see that is nylon, and the axle is just turning in there. So let's get that out. And there's the split. So I'll see if I can get this gear off and find another one that works. Alright, so I've modified that with an Athearn gear, 16 tooth, so it's the same as the original. And that seems to be working. I do notice that they wired it backwards, so I'll have to switch the wiring around. And I'll need to adjust the gear mesh too because it's too tight. But beyond that, it's looking like this is going to work. So to get in here, it's just one screw at the front. Take that out, and then the shell lifts off just like that to reveal a die-cast weight and the can motor, which is a 3-pole. Okay, with some adjustments to the gear mesh and a little more tune-up here and there, I think I have this working. So let's see how it goes. Might need a little more tuning. I think the mesh is still too tight. Alright, let's try this again. Yeah, that's much better. Still kind of noisy. Kind of expected that though. It is at least working pretty smoothly. In fact, this is probably the best I've ever seen one of these running. That's counting the one that I've tried to fix myself multiple times before. So there you go. It is entirely possible to re-gear one of these and get it going again. Now next up we've got an AHM GG1, and this is one of the late AHM models from right after Mahano got the shell tooling from Hemco. They went out of business. So they developed a new GG1 outside of the original Rivarossi models. And this is also the first version of what would become the IHC model with 2 motors. If I'm right, this just has a single motor and 8-wheel drive. But other than that, it's pretty much the same as the ones that came later from IHC. See, it looks like a coupler's broken on there. That's easy enough to replace, of course. It's had a little bit of use, not much from the look of it. It seems like it's really clean overall. So this is one that was just untested, so I don't know if it's actually non-working or not. Let's see, no response. All right, well, we'll open this up and see what's going on. Let's see, I do see a disconnected wire here. And that would come from the overhead power. So that's supposed to connect to one of the motor brushes, I believe. I don't see any broken wires aside from just the one in here. Yeah, that's turning fine. It looks like this should be a good runner with absolutely minimal need for any tune-up or maintenance. Both lights are working, non-directional. Yeah, this does look pretty dry inside, so yeah, it did need some fresh oil in all the different points, axles, gears. Also, looking at the electrical wiper system, it is just 2 wheels from each of the power trucks, and then 2 more wheels from the front and rear, so not exactly the most advanced electrical system, but at least it's 8 wheels instead of the usual 4 that you would get on the most of these Mahano-made AHM models. Well, I couldn't find any electrical issues anywhere. Everything seems to be just fine. I noticed that the end of the wire wasn't tinned or soldered or anything, so it never broke off from anywhere, so I just kind of shoved it into one of the brush plates for the motor. So now I can just snap the shell back down on there, and the pantographs should work now, picking up as if they were the left rail, or right rail. Well, I guess it doesn't matter too much with the GG1, does it? Anyway, it's back together. Looks like there are a few markings on the shell just from where it's had its paint rubbed from being in the packaging for so long, so it's kind of unfortunate. For the most part, though, it looks like it's still in really good shape, so yeah, just a few markings here and there. Alright, so for the trucks not picking up power, turns out that was just me. I had them in the wrong position, so they weren't getting contact all the way through their springs and up to the wiring system there. So that's all good. The pantographs work. This, of course, doesn't have as much traction as the later IHC version, but should still be more than enough for a decent number of passenger cars. And that's running just fine, too. Nice and smooth. Now for the last of the steam engines, we've got this AHM Rivarossi 240. Looks like this is one of the earlier versions too. Not quite the earliest. It's got the can motor instead of the built-in square motor, which on those the tender frame acted as part of the motor housing. But it does have all of the original brass trim, which is bright and shiny, you can see. So this has been kept in really nice shape. It's clean for the most part too. It's just a little dent in the cab right there. I guess it is missing a couple details around here, unfortunately. But yeah, most everything is there. And I have a 240 of my own, which is just like this one, so I don't know, maybe I'll be able to replicate that detail somehow. Okay, so it's not getting power to the motor. Actually, looking again, there's no universal either, so I'm going to have to replace that. So let's get this apart, see what all it needs. Still nothing. Okay, so it seems like these brushes just aren't making good contact with the commutator. It's wanting to turn, but it can't quite. Alright, so one problem is that both of the brushes were so tight in the holders that the springs just couldn't move them through. So they're just kind of stuck in there. The other problem is that the commutator is just full of crud, so I'll get that cleaned up. Get the brushes springing down a little more freely, and this motor should start to run. There we go. It's running like a new motor now. Now to remove the body from the steam engine, just to make sure this is all tuned up and working as well as possible. First I've got to take off the bottom plate here. That takes care of the front truck. Then there's the front screw here. And there's also two more screws in the back here. With all that off of there, body just lifts right off. The weight runs all the way through it on this older version, which is nice. Gives it a good balance over the drive wheels. And with those two traction tires, it's got plenty of pulling power. Anyway, there's the worm drive on the metal chassis. Very simple setup. Alright, I'm almost done here. And to get this back on the track, I've created a new universal since the old one is missing. It's 3D resin printed. And I think I got that pretty accurate. Should turn freely in there and work nicely. And since this is low torque, it shouldn't have any problems. I mean, the original one was a tougher Delrin plastic, but yeah, this should hold up fine. Also, for the detail on top of the engine, I copied from my own here to create a new one, again with 3D resin printing. Of course, it doesn't look quite as good since I brush painted it with brass paint, while the original has that sort of plated finish. And I replaced the rear coupler, which was missing. I just happened to have a Rivarossi coupler on hand, so I made a little modification to fit this tender, and now that is on there and should be at the right height. So I'll get this back together and we'll see how it runs. Alright, first time on the track. Here it goes. Some little electrical pickup issues. Alright, turns out I just had the electrical wipers for the drive wheels upside down, so they were touching the plastic instead of the metal. So let's try this again. Yeah, that's way better. So it was only picking up from the one front wheel before. And this is probably the best running of all the steam engines I've fixed for this video. And now we've got a Bachmann Plus GP35. which looks like it's missing some railings. I don't see them anywhere in the box, so yeah, it's just something that'll have to be replaced with new ones at some time. Anyway, for the condition of the thing, it looks like it's been on some layouts for a while, so it's pretty dusty. So I'll have to clean that up. Handrails are a little bent out of shape, and yeah, it did used to have those other ones installed, but yeah, they were just, they must have gone missing whenever this was packed back up. Well, we can at least make a good working model out of this, I think. Take off the fuel tank. 2 screws holding the shell on. There we go. Yeah, split chassis design. Very common for the Bachmann Spectrum and Plus models of the late 80s and through all the 90s. So aside from this being a split chassis, these are exactly the same trucks, same motor that's in the F7 that I was working on just a little earlier. So let's just go ahead and skip ahead to the track test. Amazing what a little soap and water can do for a shell, because that looks a lot better than before. And as for the repairs, I just had to fix the rear universal cup on the worm shaft for the rear truck. And then there was a piece of dirt stuck in one of the gears. I thought it was cracked from the way that it was turning, but it was actually just dirt binding up in there, so cleaned that up. And buffed the contacts for the headlight board because they were too tarnished to work. And now that is a perfect runner. And that is smooth as can be. Lights are shining bright. So aside from needing some new handrails on the front and back, this one's ready to go. And I've got just a couple more that weren't in that first shot at the beginning. So we've got right here a Spectrum 44 tonner. This is one of the classic versions with the dual motors. So I haven't actually worked on one of these before. My own 44 tonner is a newer single motor model. I have at least worked with these trucks for a couple projects, making some critters. As for the full model, this is my first time working on one of these, so this will be kind of interesting for me. Looks like the chassis is being partially held in by these couplers. I should only have to take one out. There we go. Yeah, so directional lighting board. And this is not a split chassis, it's just a single piece weight. A couple wires going up to the board. Made by Cater, Bachmann's parent company. So these were known for having motor burnouts, so hopefully that's not the case with this one here. But we'll find out in just a moment. Well, the light works. Seems like the motors are trying to work. I'll turn just a little more. Oh. Okay, well I think I'll just have to pull these trucks apart and see what's up. It might just be a contact issue. A couple of the wires weren't well soldered to their contacts there, so that could have been part of the problem. Still want to open this up and make sure everything's fine though. Okay, so yeah, the motor makes contact with these in here, which look like they're kind of tarnished and even covered in oil, so that would be a problem. The wheels themselves, this is all turning very smoothly. So mechanically, this is in great shape. The motor's running a little slow. It just needs to clear up some of that oxidation on the commutator there. I don't want to pull this one apart like I usually would for the HO scale motors, just because it's so tiny. It's easy to lose some of those springs and brushes. And as you can hear, this is already improving quite a bit. Alright, that's working a lot better. And it turns out there is a tiny crack in one of the gears. So it has just a tiny thump each time the wheels turn, but it seems to be working well overall. So on both trucks, both wires ended up falling off, and it looks like it's because they actually failed to scrape off the blackening, which is resistant to soldering. So I'm just taking care of that. Made a big difference on the first truck. The solder stuck straight to it. It works. There's just that tiny noise from the split gear on one axle. The split at least isn't bad, so it's not pushing the teeth really far apart. Yeah, overall that's working really nicely. There's full speed. Back it up. Split's a little more present going backwards. Still doesn't stop it from running though. The motors aren't perfectly even either. That was one of the issues with this design. But most of the time they're able to kind of even each other out just since they don't have very much torque. All right, we're finally down to the last one. What we've got here is a Bachmann Spectrum Doodlebug. I got one of these a long time ago, and the only problem I've ever had with it was that the axle gears split. We'll see if this one has the same problem or not. If it does, I've at least found out that I can repair them because I did that with mine too. I'll just hook up to the rear wheels here because it's a front truck drive only. If there's any electrical contact, might have to make some adjustments there. Like most models that are long passenger bodies like this, there are just a ton of latches all along the length of the body. But sometimes it can be really hard to hold those open while you're getting them all freed. I should be able to hook up from here. Yeah, these are the track terminals. It looks like it's also got a loose universal. But at least the motor works. Untwist these. You have to squeeze the sides in order to pull this forward and out. Now check out those gears. Yeah, that's cracked. So that just spins right on that shaft. I'm guessing the other one is the same way. Yep, also cracked. So I'll do some work on these, see if I can get them closed up and fitting a little more tightly. And hopefully that'll be all it needs. Okay, well I think that'll do it. I got the wheels and contacts all cleaned up, so that should work a lot better now. The gears are repaired as well as I can do. There may still be a little clicking or a light thump as it goes down the track. And the mount for the PC board, this little clip, it's split in half beyond all repair. So I just have that held down with a piece of electrical tape now, and that seems to be fine. So I think now I can put the shell on and we can get this track tested and see how it works. All right, just like I thought, there's a light thump from one of the gears, but overall that's running pretty nicely. At least as well as I can get it. And just fine in reverse too. So there you have it. 21 models, all restored to working order, and I will be selling these at the Great Midwest Train Show near Chicago for the November 5th, 2023 train show, which is tomorrow as of this video's uploading date. So for anything that does not sell, if anything doesn't sell, I will be listing it on eBay afterwards, and you can find any posts with updates about these in the community section of my channel. So I hope some of you can make it over there and maybe even purchase or maybe even win one of these models at a later date. We'll just have to see.